In this video, I will show you how to implement user registration, authentication, and authorization in ASP.NET Web APIs using Identity API and bearer tokens. Then in the next video, I will show you how to create roles and how to implement role-based authorization. You can find the video link in the description. First, let's create a new project. So we can select ASP.NET Core Web API, then Next. So we can call the project Web API, for example. And let's call the solution My Store. Then Next. Let's select the version 9 of the .NET framework. We will use HTTPS. We will use controllers, so we need to check this box. Then let's click on Create. So now the project is created successfully. Let's go to program.cs. So here we can see that we will use OpenAPI and we will not use Swagger. And to be able to test this application, we need to install Swagger. So let's go to the application. We can make a right click, then manage NuGet packages, then browse. And we need only to install Swagger UI. So let's write it here. Let's select this dependency and let's install it. Let's close this page. And to use Swagger, just after this statement, we need to add another statement. So we need to call use Swagger UI and we need to configure it to use the API documentation that is available at this URL, which is defined by this statement. So this statement allows us to generate the documentation and to make it available at this URL. Then let's configure the application to run Swagger. So let's go to the Properties folder, then Launch Settings. And here we are using this profile, the HTTPS profile, which is available just here. So here we can see that we will not run the browser. Let's change this and let's set it to true. Then let's define the launch URL. And it will be the Swagger URL. Also, we can change the port number. So let's use the port number 4000, for example. Now let's test the application. And we obtain this page. So we can see that for the moment we have only this endpoint. Now let's delete the default controller, which is available in the controllers folder. So let's delete this file. Let's delete the model as well. And also we can delete this file. Then let's create a new connection with the database. So we can use Server Explorer, or also we can click on View, then Server Explorer. Then let's create a new connection. Then let's provide the server name. So it is dot, which means localhost, /SQL Express. Then we need to trust the server certificate. And let's create a new database. We can call it DB10, for example. Then OK. So here we can see that the database does not exist and I want to create it. So let's click on Yes. Then we need to copy the connection string. So we can make a right click, then Properties. Then here we have the connection string. Let's copy it. And let's save it in appsettings.json. So here let's create a new section. We can call it connection strings. Then let's create a new key. We can call it default connection, for example. Then let's paste the connection string. So here we can see that we have double slash, but in trust server certificate we have some spaces. We need to delete them, otherwise we will have an error. Then we need to install new packages to allow us to connect to the database. So let's make a right click, then manage NuGet packages, then browse. And the first package is Entity Framework SQL Server. Let's select this package. Let's select the version, then install. So now the package is installed correctly. Let's install another package. It is called Entity Framework Tools. Let's select this package. So this package allows us to use these commands on the Package Manager console. So let's select the version, then install. Then apply. Then we need to install Identity Entity Framework. So here let's write Identity Entity Framework. Let's select this package. It is identity.entityFramework core. And let's install it. Now we have all the required packages. So let's close this page. And let's create the application DbContext class. So let's create a new folder. And let's call it services. Then let's create a new class. And let's call it application DbContext. So this class should extend the identity DbContext class of identity. So here let's add colon, then identity DbContext. Then we need to create the constructor. So we can use this helper and let's select this option. So we will create the constructor that requires a parameter that allows us to configure the application DbContext. Then let's add this class to the service container. So let's go back to program.cs and let's add this class to the service container. So just here we can call builder.services.addDbContext. And the type of the DbContext that we will use is application DbContext. Then we need to configure the DbContext to connect to the SQL Server database. So here let's add a parameter. We can call it options. Then let's call options.useSQLServer. Then we need to provide it with the name of the connection string. So here let's add a string. Let's write name is equal to and the name of the connection string that we defined in appsettings.json, which is default connection. Now let's save all the files and let's create a new migration file that allows us to create the identity tables in the database. So let's go to Package Manager console. If you don't have it just here, then we can click on Tools, then NuGet Package Manager, then Package Manager console. Then here we need to call Add Migration. And you can create the migration called First Migration. And we obtain this file, First Migration, that allows us to create the identity tables in the database. Now let's create the tables. So we need to call update database. Now the tables are created successfully, so we can find them in the database. Let's expand this connection, then tables. And here we have the identity tables. So if you don't have these tables, then we need just to refresh the connection. So here we can click on a refresh. Then let's add the identity API. So we can use the documentation website of the .NET framework and we can use this page. So first we need to add the identity services to the service container. So we can copy this statement and let's add it to program.cs. We can add it after the addDbContext statement, for example. So this statement is useless because we are already using use authorization, but we can add it anyway. Then we need to activate identity API. So we need to copy this statement. And let's paste it here. So this statement allows us to add identity services to the service container. Then we need to enable the endpoints. So let's go back to the documentation website and let's copy this statement. And we will use it to configure the pipeline. So let's paste it here. Now let's run the application. So we obtain this page that contains the different endpoints of identity. We have the register endpoint, the login endpoint. We have also this endpoint that allows us to have more details about the authenticated user. So first let's create a new account. Let's click on try it out, and we need to send the email address and the password. Let's send the request. But here we have an error with the validation errors, so we need to update the password according to these two constraints. Let's send the request. So this time we have a success response and the account has been created successfully. Now let's use the created account to log in. So let's use the login endpoint. Let's click on try it out. So to use tokens, we don't need to change these two parameters. So let's provide the email address and the password. And we don't need to use these parameters, so let's delete them. Let's send the request. So we obtain a success response and we have these parameters. So this is the access token and this is the refresh token. Now let's see the user details. So we can use this endpoint. But to test this endpoint, we need to send the token. So here, if we click on try it out, then execute, we obtain this error, which means unauthorized. So to be able to access to this endpoint, we need the token. So let's go back to the previous endpoint and let's copy the access token. And to include the token in the request, we can use Postman. So let's go to Postman. Let's create a new tab. I will send a GET request and here let's provide the URL. Then let's add the token. So let's click on Authorization. Then here let's select Bearer Token and here let's paste the token. Let's send the request. And here we have a success response with the email address of the authenticated user. Now let's create two additional endpoints in our application, one public endpoint and one private endpoint. So let's stop the application and let's create a new controller. Let's select API, then API controller, then add. Let's call it account controller. Then let's create a new endpoint that will be accessible to any user. So it will be accessible using the get method. We can call the method welcome and it will be accessible at the URL /API/ the name of the controller, which is account. So if the user is not authenticated, we can display the message you are not authenticated. Otherwise, we can display the message you are authenticated. Then let's test the application. So I will test it using Postman. So we can disable the browser. So let's go to Launch Settings. And for Launch Browser, we can set it to false. Let's test the application. Let's go to Postman. So we will send a GET request to the new endpoint. Let's send the request. So here we have a success response, and because we did not include the token, we can see that we have this message, you are not authenticated. Now let's include the token. So we can copy it from the previous tab. Let's copy it from here. Then here let's go to Authorization, then Bearer Token, and let's paste the token. So it is already here, but to be sure, let's paste it again. And this time we have you are authenticated. Then let's create a new endpoint that requires the user authentication. So in Account Controller, let's create a new action that allows us to return the user profile. First, let's create a new module. So let's create a new folder. And let's call it Modules. Then let's create a new class. And let's call it User Profile. Then let's add the properties that we want to return to the user. So we need the ID, which is a string, because the ID in identity by default, it is of type string. Then we will return the username, the email address, and the phone number. Let's go back to the controller. And then we need to request a service from the service container. So let's create the constructor. And let's request the service. So it is user manager of identity user. Let's add the required package. And let's save this service into a field. So we can use this button, then create and assign field user manager. Then let's create a new action. We can call it profile, and it will be accessible using the get method at the URL /API/account/profile. So it should be protected. So here we have to add the authorize attribute. Then let's read the data of the current user. So we can use user manager.getUserAsync, and this is the user property of this class. Here we have an error. So to fix it, we have to add async task. So if the current user is null, we will return a bad request. Of course, this should not occur because this method is protected using the authorize attribute. So if we execute this method, this means that we have the current user. Then let's create the user profile object and let's fill it using the data of the current user. So we will set the user ID, the name, the email address, and the phone number. Then let's return a success response with the user profile. Let's test the application. So let's send a request to the new endpoint. We will send a get request to this endpoint. So if we send a request without the token, we have unauthorized. So let's go to the authorization tab, and here let's select bearer, and we will use this token. Let's send the request. So this time we have a success response with the user profile. Now I will show you how to test the application using the front-end application. So I already prepared this file, so let's open it. And we obtain this login form. So let's see the source code of this file. So in this file, we have the login form. So here we have the email address and the password. Then we have this submit button. So when we click on the submit button, we will execute the method handle submit, which is this method. So in this method, first we will prevent the browser from submitting the form. Then we will read the email address and the password from the form, and then we will create the data object that contains the email address and the password. Then we will submit the data object to this URL. So we will submit the data using the post method, and then we will read the response, and if we have a success response, we will display this success message. So we will display to the user the received access token. And if we have a bad response, we can display bad email or password alert. And if we have any exception, we can display this alert, cannot connect to the server. Now let's fill the form. So before sending the request, let's see the console. Now let's send the request. And we obtain this alert, cannot connect to the server. So here we can see that we have this error on the console, cross-origin request blocked. So to fix this error, we need to configure our application to enable CORS. So let's go to our application, let's stop it. Then let's go to program.cs. Then here we can call app.useCourse. So we can call app.useCourse. We will set the policy to allow any header, any method, and any origin. Let's test the application again. Let's go back to the form. So let's clear the console and let's send the request. So this time we have a success response, and this is the access token. In the next video, I will show you how to implement the role-based authorization using identity. So I will show you how to create user roles, how to create custom users, how to register users with custom details, and how to enable role-based authorization. You can find the video link in the description.